Hey, this is Steve Bloom, and you are listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
Let's get dangerous.
Report to the...
Yeah. You're listening to the Geekcast Radio Network. Unleash the geek in you.
Hello and welcome to Geekcast Radio. This is episode 95, and I am one of your hosts, TF2 and Mike. Joining me is Steve Megatron. Hello.
Hello.
And of course, Optimus Solo. Hello.
Why, of course.
Why, of course. Exactly. Tonight we're going to get animated and talk about some cartoons of the 90s. As always, we'll try to give it to you in 30 minutes or less. Well, maybe not. These bigger topics, folks, we found out last week when Kevin and I talked 90s television, can't really stick to the 30-minute thing. You're already getting... Huh?
Or did we just find out that I talk too much?
Well, that too. But, you know... I mean, 30 minutes are free, it's a whole pizza thing and whatever else, but it's free content anyway, so I mean, it's not like, you know, we're charging you for this.
But we could be.
We should be.
It's not, they changed it too. It's no longer the 30 minutes are free. Now it's like, even if we're early, we give it to you for free.
That's right.
Ooh. Technical difficulties. Let's move on, shall we?
Okay, so 90s cartoons. Well, a lot of the 90s cartoons that got really famous for being a 90s cartoon started in the 80s. So cartoons that passed the torch to the 90s. DuckTales started in 87, didn't it?
Yeah, DuckTales was 87 to 90, yep.
Yep. What else? Turtles. Turtles started in 87.
We got Alvin and the Chipmunks. Started in 83, ended in 90. So, I mean, it just barely made it into the decade.
Yeah.
Muppet Babies, 1984 to 91.
G.I. Joe.
Some of them were in syndication and things of that nature as well.
Yeah.
You had Adventures of Gummy Bears, 85 to 91. Rescue Rangers, 89 to 90, and Garfield and Friends, 88 to 94.
Yep.
So those are kind of some of the main ones that were started in the 80s technically, and then went to the 90s. But I think, like Steve's mentioning too, you got to take into consideration all the stuff that was all in 80, as far as like only new episodes that aired in the 80s, aired in syndication in the 90s. So you kind of had those that were still sticking around in rerun form. But interesting ones that kind of bridge the gap there, and I think it's somewhat interesting as far as kind of passing the torch, not just from one decade to another decade as far as cartoons go, but I think like even channel-wise, Disney-wise, WB-wise, you know, whatever it might have been, like you kind of had that going on too, because the DuckTales, Rescue Rangers, Gummy Bears kind of passed the torch into a whole different version of cartoons that we got from Disney in the 90s, which we'll talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
to me, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, last thing I'll say, and then I'll let you jump back in, Mike. But Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is like one of the key passing of the torches, because technically it starts in the 80s, but it honestly had a bigger impact on what came after it in the 90s. Because, and we'll get to that in a second, but the 90s cartoons are way different than 80s cartoons, and I think the Turtles is the reason why. So I'll talk about that later.
yeah, Turtles, it's so funny. That show basically lasted for 9-10 years. And the crazy thing is, I remember watching it as a kid from age 7 to 11 or 12, 91, 92. I don't remember it past that. I know nothing of season 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Like, none of the Turtle stuff in the original 87, Fred Wolf, David Wise. What I remember is...
We can fix that.
Oh, I know. We will, eventually. Yes, I know. But what I'm saying is that you're saying that it changed how the cartoons felt between the 80s and the 90s. It was one of those mainstays of changing how cartoons were not only viewed but looked at and just perceived. And what?
I was gonna say maybe we should use this as a bouncing off point just to compare the 80s and the 90s.
Absolutely.
In a way as well. And I'd like to get Steve's input on this too, because I think he's much more well versed in some of these 90s cartoons than I am. But the reason I'm saying that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is kind of really, if I was to pick one cartoon that passed the torch from the 80s to 90s, it would be that one over all these other ones. I know there was a lot of other good cartoons that we mentioned, Garfield, DuckTales, etc. But if I had to pick one, it's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because if you look at all of the boys' cartoons, like not early childhood, like kindergarten type stuff, but if you're looking at like the boys' action cartoons and of that ilk from the 80s, you have a lot of things that are either robots or humans. So you have like the likes of Transformers, G.I. Joe, He-Man. Cops is still just human beings. Mask is human beings in different types of cars. You had a little bit with the Thundercats and Silverhawks, but Silverhawks technically still just people in suits.
Yeah, partly mental, partly real.
Yeah, but Turtles comes on, and it's kind of like this zany, crazy idea, because now just listen to the title, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like, that's out of left field. That's not humans. That's not robots. That's like this crazy animal mutant, amalgamation thing. And that's what kind of shifts gears to what the 90s does, because the 90s tries to recapture what the Turtles had. You have stuff like Attack the Killer Tomatoes, Barnyard Tomatoes, Bucky O'Hare and the Toad Wars, Toxic Crusaders, Wild West Cowboys of Moo Mesa, SWAT Cats, Biker Mice from Mars, Wildcats, Street Sharks. This is a completely different type of cartoon than what we got in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And it has to be due to Turtles. It has to be. So I think that is the passing of the torch to kind of more of the just general, straightforward humans and robots to all these different types of animals and mutants and crazy things that you would never think of in a million years, which the 90s gave us a ton of.
Absolutely. Steve, thoughts?
No, I definitely agree with that. I think that Turtles was definitely the one that started that whole revolution and kind of, in a sense, was the start of all that extreme stuff that the 90s tried to pull. Yeah. Because obviously every show had to try and one-up the next one. And it got more insane as the 90s went on from beginning to end. I mean, you had the more serious, darker stuff in the beginning, and then it just got more absurd by the end of the 90s. When you got from, Spider-Man animated series in the beginning of the 90s, and then you get Spider-Man Unlimited in, like, the end of the 90s to try and combat Batman Beyond. Like, it was just... certain things just didn't mesh by the end of the 90s, but when you have something like the Turtles that kind of started that whole revolution in the 80s, and then it continued very strongly through the 90s between merchandise and the animated series.
Steve, sorry to interject. Which one of those do you think came closest to recapturing the Turtles? Was it like SWAT Cats? Was it? I didn't watch a lot of these shows. Bucky O'Hare.
Bucky O'Hare was kind of an odd duck show. Like it was one of those ones that I never really fully got into. I mean, I watched every one of these series at one point. Mm-hmm. Bucky, I watched, and I would almost equate that Biker Mice from Mars was in a sense like kind of like the Bucky O'Hare thing. Like it was kind of like a one-off thing, and then it just kind of flopped. Whereas you had things like Street Sharks, and you had SWAT Cats, and to me, SWAT Cats was much closer to the Ninja Turtles. Plus, you had the voice of Donatello as one of the SWAT Cats, which even helped bridge that gap a little bit more.
Right.
Plus, I mean, and he was the brainy, geeky guy that was on the team and came up with all the inventions. And so, I mean, it kind of was like a cat version of Ninja Turtles, except everybody in the city was a cat. Instead of
that, and you pretty much had the thing of, the SWAT Cats were washed out, officers out of the police force in Mega Cat City. And they basically, not necessarily were in hiding, but they were kind of shunned by everybody, including Commander Farrell. The only one that really looked out for them was Callie Briggs, kind of like the Turtles with April. Like, the Turtles had to actually physically hide. The SWAT Cats did not, but It's very similar now that I think of it.
To me, I would say SWAT Cats was about the best comparison to the Turtles in the 90s of something that kind of reinvented itself, but yet was still... It wasn't quite that weird extreme, like G.I. Joe extreme, Ghostbusters extreme, like everything that just had to be extreme. It was probably the best logical continuation, reinvention of something like Turtles. And Street Sharks would probably be kind of second to that. I mean, we had like, you know, the Dino Saucers and Extreme Dinosaurs and stuff from like the 80s and 90s or whatever, but even that didn't really hold a torch to Turtles compared to like, I would say SWAT Cats was probably the closest thing to Turtles that wasn't a superhero franchise, wasn't a Disney franchise, wasn't just, you know, I mean, this was like pre, you know, and I would almost say like Gargoyles was another one that was pretty good too. That kind of took that turtle dynamic of, instead of turtles, you had the gargoyles, and you still had humans, but it had more of a mythological, mysterious, and real world application to it. That kind of took the idea of the mutants and the aliens and kind of converted it to, you know, mythological people and creatures instead, and that it kind of morphed into it's something different yet similar. So, and you had majority of Star Trek: The Next Generation cast voicing those, so it was kind of another one of those that was really easy to attach yourself to if you were a fan of Turtles.
Yeah, it's just, I just find it an interesting phenomenon that you know, if you look at the 80s, it's all humans. You know, even if you look at the second tier or kind of like the one-off like series for boys action that only lasted maybe a season or two, even like Centurions, Visionaries, like they're still just humans. You know what I mean? Like the main team, the main characters are humans with some type of vehicle or special power or thing that they're carrying, and that is not the case. Like it's not just that you have all these crazy, you know, SWAT Cats or Skeleton Warriors or Biker Mice from Mars or Wildcats. You know, it's not just that. It's that you also don't have any of those just straight up like human-based cartoons, unless it was like trying to be a spin-off of something from the 80s, like the New Adventures of He-Man, G.I. Joe Extreme. You know, a couple of those that most people would argue didn't work as well. You don't have a lot of just boys action cartoons in the 90s that are like human-based.
Well, okay, yeah. Yeah, you're right.
I would say it's about half and half.
Yeah, but the thing of it is the 90s went comics and video games is how cartoons went in the 90s.
It didn't just go that route. It also went full-on Disney, because if you had anything that was Disney-related, it was not human-related for the most part, unless you got into Aladdin or Hercules. Like, everything else was... all their animated series were animals.
Right, but what I'm saying is comparing Kevin's notion about 80s boys action cartoons versus 90s, BTAS, Superman the Animated Series, eventually Batman Beyond, like that was the superhero cartoon in the 90s was the new boys action place, and none of those cartoons were actually like most. You know, you go back to the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s to Looney Tunes. None of the Looney Tunes shorts were made for kids. They were made for adults. You look at Batman the Animated Series, yes, kids did watch it. Most parents, I'm pretty sure, just like my stepmother told me, oh no, you can't watch that. It's too graphic. It's too this. It's too that. Whatever.
The other thing I wasn't allowed to watch was like The Simpsons or something, or
oh my god,
like everything else, like it was fair game.
We'll get to that in a second.
I'm just going to say I've never said this to anybody on a podcast before in almost 10 years of podcasting. I got spanked for watching The Simpsons at age 9. Yeah, no. But my point is that the Batmans, the Supermans, like specifically BTAS, that was made for the fans of Batman. That was made for the fans that liked the 89 movie, but that was more so made for adults than it was for 12-year-old kids on Fox Kids at the time.
It just seems like you take your G.I. Joes, your He-Mans, your Mask and all that, you eliminate all of that, and basically what we ended up with is it went one of two directions. It either went Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, crazy animal morphized, character shows, or it went to strictly comic cartoons, which is an interesting thing because we didn't get comic cartoons really like this in the 80s. Not this many.
You know why we didn't? Because the 70s kind of sullied the whole comic cartoon thing with Super Friends and Adventures of Batman and Robin and all of that.
Yeah, but if you took just like a cartoon fan or just a kid that grew up, and say like, hey, name me a comic book cartoon from the 80s, you're not going to be able to come up with as much. Like 90s has Batman the Animated Series, X-Men, Fantastic Four, Iron Man, Spider-Man, Incredible Hulk, Superman the Animated Series, Avengers, Batman Beyond, Spider-Man Unlimited. Like, it's a ton of stuff in the 90s that was comic related, and that, I think, changed the dynamic of cartoons that we had in the 80s.
And you also had, even though they were in the 80s, now that I realize this, a few months ago, TV's Mr. Neil and I did an episode of Pixels in the Animation talking about some random video game cartoons, because at episode 94 of that nearly 3, 4, 5-year journey, we're kind of running out of steam, and we're trying to grasp at straws to how we're going to get this podcast to 100 episodes. Not really, but we looked at Pac-Man, we looked at Saturday Supercade, and I'm thinking, these are 90s things, and I'm like,
no.
I watched them, I'm like, oh my god, people say the Super Mario Brothers Super Show hurts their eyes. That Pac-Man cartoon hurt my eyes.
Yo, it's the Mario Brothers, and plumbing's the game. Found the secret water zone while working on the drain. Lend the princess a hand in the mushroom land. Join the action with the plumbers, you'll be hooked on the brothers. Now, Evil Koopa and his troopers are up to misbehaving. They kidnapped the princess, mushroom land needs saving. Abusing and confusing, everybody discovers they can't help but be hooked on the brothers.
It is a legend no one will forget. Everyone thought King Koopa had left the Mushroom Kingdom, and then his doom ship attacked. King Koopa was back with the greatest danger ever known, his Koopa kids. Using their new superpowers, the Super Mario Brothers rescued Princess Toadstool and beat back the evil Koopa family. I'll get those plumbers!
Welcome to Videoland.
Wake up, Kid Icarus.
Welcome to Castlevania.
It's Congo Land.
My brain will get you, little princess.
Princess, the palace is under siege.
Behold, the ultimate warp zone.
Kevin, I thought I told you to clean up your room. Whoa!
Captain N, the Game Master.
But yeah, 90s was also, like, 85, we had the birth of the Nintendo Entertainment System, which would then go on to produce all these other characters. And in the 90s, we got video game cartoons based on those. Super Mario Brothers Super Show, which had all of that. Adventures of Super Mario Brothers 3, New Super Mario World. We had Captain N, the Game Master, of an actual quote-unquote kid that got sucked into his TV, into a video game world. Who didn't want that to happen to them in 1990?
Yeah, you had both Sonic series. You had Earthworm Jim.
Yep.
You had a lot of stuff that was first and foremost a video game that got transferred into a cartoon, and it all started kind of like '89, because '89 is when technically when Super Mario Brothers Super Show and Captain N started.
Right.
So it's just kind of another one that kind of starts right in the beginning, end of '80s, beginning of '90s, and that you're definitely right about that. We had a lot of video game and a lot of comics that were finally making their way back into cartoons, or into cartoons for the first time.
Absolutely, yeah. It was a crazy fun time, and I don't know. I look at a lot of animation today, and I think the 80s and 90s got it done better.
I think we got spoiled. Honestly, I think we got a lot of, and I'm not saying that stuff that's out now isn't good, but the majority of it is a lot of like laziness or rehashing the same stuff we've gotten. And that's with anything. It happens. Right. It's bound to happen. There's only so many plans in the cookie jar that they can pull from. But I think we got spoiled with good original content in the 80s and 90s, and then now everything is just kind of a rehash of everything we got then because there's nothing original left.
The original stuff that they do now it seems like it's way more comedy based. If you're looking at the comedy cartoons or some of those types of things, those are where you're getting the more original stuff. But when you're looking at the action specific genre or those types of things like what we were just talking about, that's where we're getting rehash after rehash. The interesting thing though is just how different the 80s and the 90s were though, because even though we get a plethora of cartoons in both decades, it's a very different dynamic. Like we were just talking about with the difference, with the video games and the comic book characters. We'll get into in a second with the primetime cartoons that weren't a thing in the 80s that become a thing in the 90s. And I think one thing that has a lot to do with that is the changing dynamic of just TV in general, because the 80s, you still had a setting where you only have certain channels. You have your main network channels, you have a few other ones, but it's not like the hundreds and hundreds of channels we have now. That starts to really balloon in the 90s. And what we also see, in the 90s is the death of the Saturday morning cartoon. So we have a change of dynamic where you mainly were getting most of your cartoons in the latter half of the decade, at least, on just weekday afternoons, or like we're going to talk about eventually prime time. So it's definitely a change of dynamic when we saw the Saved by the Bells and the California Dreams kind of kick out cartoons from our Saturday morning lineup.
Yeah, and it sucked.
Yeah. Because that's when we were getting stuff like Muppet Babies and Garfield and Friends, and all those types of shows were Saturday morning cartoons, and that's not a thing halfway through the 90s.
Absolutely. All right.
Steve did mention though. Sorry, keep stealing your thunder, but Steve was mentioning. He said he was getting in trouble for watching, or was not allowed to watch Simpsons. You were getting spanked for watching Simpsons, but that's definitely one of the iconic things about the 90s is this reintroduction to primetime cartoons, adult-oriented cartoons. Simpsons, Ren and Stimpy, Beavis and Butthead, Space Ghost, Dr. Katz, King of the Hill, South Park, Family Guy, Futurama all start in the 90s with Simpsons as a caveat because it kind of started before that.
Yeah, Simpsons was December something of 89. Technically, it started earlier on the Tracy Ullman show, but when its first episode debuted, it was Christmas of 89.
But it's hard to even imagine a cartoon landscape without primetime, without this adult-oriented, without the Adult Swim, or all these different things. But 90s is where that all started.
Yep. Very much so. Adult Swim, you had Toonami, you had a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, and I don't know about you guys because, like I said, some of these are more adult-oriented, etc. So I don't know how much of these types of cartoons you guys were watching in the 90s. I was not watching, outside of a few random episodes of Ren and Stimpy. I didn't watch South Park or Simpsons. I didn't watch Family Guy until after the 2000s, for the most part. So, did you guys watch any of these growing up and going through the 90s?
Steve?
As far as which shows?
Just any of these primetime adult.
The primetime adult ones.
Family Guy, Futurama.
As I got older, I watched The Simpsons more. I watched, well, primarily what it was is I never really watched a lot of The Simpsons until my parents got divorced. And because my dad enjoyed the show, my mom never did. When we went over to his house, pretty much anything was fair game. Like, just, it didn't matter. So we watched a lot of The Simpsons over there. So we watched like the Halloween specials, which my favorite still to this day is the one where Homer goes into the black hole and comes out as the 3D animated character and ends up in the real world. But then there's, we watched a lot of South Park. We went and saw the movie when it came out because of watching it on TV. And then, so like even to this day, some of the stupid jokes of like, oh, terribly wrap yourself up in nice little towel. And the harassment panda and Mr. Hand and all these weird things that you killed Kenny, so I mean a lot of that stuff kind of stuck with me over the years just because I watched it. I never got into Family Guy. Like, I mean, some things were kind of funny on it, but I found it more like repetitive dumb comedy. Whereas like in The Simpsons was always like that thing that was like a political commentary that was like always way behind, or in some cases told the future decades in advance. As they've come to notice over the last 2 years, on a multitude of things. But then you look at South Park and it's like, because they're so quick at getting those out, they were like kind of right on it whenever something happened. So it was like the lowbrow version of like a SNL type thing that you could kind of catch these things making fun of society. And then, you get things like The Critic or shows like that where they're kind of making fun of Hollywood and some of the things like that. I actually still have that DVD set in my desk, which I've yet to go back to and review. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of shows that were kind of making fun of a lot of things during that time that were adults. There was that Duckman show. Oh yeah, too, during that time.
The fact that George Costanza is Duckman just blows my mind.
Still hilarious.
Yeah.
And then Greg Berger is the other character. So
yeah, corn-fed.
Yeah. So like I said, I mean, there was a lot of like dirty animated comedies back then, but I think they were more tasteful than what we get now, where it's a lot of like lowest common denominator, lowbrow, like it's not intelligent writing. It's just, it's going for the hip jokes. And then that's about it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For me, I was watching The Simpsons religiously. Obviously,
I get spanked for it.
Yeah. Well,
I never got spanked for it. I just was told not to watch it. Like, I was able to watch any animated series for the most part. It didn't matter. It just, that was not one that was looked upon very highly.
I just remember seeing Ren and Stimpy, a couple of those episodes for the first time, and it kind of like blew my mind because I'd never seen a cartoon that was like that.
I used to watch that with my cousin, who sadly has been passed away for a couple of years, but we used to play the video game on the Sega Genesis, which was hilarious. I remember playing that. But anyways, we used to watch the show. Like, I used to watch it all the time, and this is not that disgusting version. Like, this is the other one,
right?
Which I didn't even know the other one existed until a few years ago when I saw it on Netflix. But my uncle could do like a spot on Ren, like, "You stupid idiot, my ice cream bar." So like he would, mimic a lot of that kind of stuff. But that was one of my favorite ones as a kid. Now I can't stand it, but
yeah, I think it's that one and Beavis and Butthead and South Park really broke the mold though for because we would have never seen that type of cartoon in the 80s, and then it kind of laid the groundwork for all this crazy stuff we see at the beginning of the 2000s and still today, where they're just doing crazy adult humor, offbeat, filthy sex, whatever you want to, there's nothing off limits anymore because of those shows.
Nope.
Pretty much.
For me, most of the stuff that I was watching, it ended up being like we said, the stuff that carried over into the 90s from the 80s. I really dug Adventures of Super Mario Bros. 3. I thought that was hilarious because I love that game. Like I said, Captain and the Game Master. The Legend of Zelda, which was part of Super Mario Bros. Super Show, but only aired on Fridays. That was different. You had Super Mario Monday through Thursday, and then Zelda on Fridays, which essentially meant you had to wait a week to see the next Zelda episode.
This is the Triforce of Wisdom, Link. The evil wizard Ganon has the Triforce of Power. Whoever gets both Triforces will rule this land forever. You must help me, Link.
Hey, for you, Zelda, anything.
Nice job, hero.
Hey, excuse me, princess.
What else was I watching? I cannot get into any of the other adult cartoons. I've never had any interest in Family Guy. Don't like half the stuff Seth MacFarlane does anyway. I liked Futurama, but I only saw bits and pieces of it. I've seen a handful of episodes of South Park. I don't care either way about that show. I don't dislike it, but at the same time, I'm not all gaga over it. The only line I really remember from like the first few seasons, or the first season, whatever episode it was because it was huge back then. Because the radio station DJs were always talking about it, was when Cartman said, "Knock off all this tree-hugging hippie crap." That's the only line I really remember from the show. I've looked up various episodes since then just to see what has been going on with South Park. Like, a couple of years ago, they did an episode all about Yelp. So there's that.
Well, they definitely have intelligent writing in South Park.
Oh, they do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Exactly. That's the whole reason why it's been around as long as it has. What else was I watching? Like Steve said, Batman, Superman, that kind of stuff. Batman Beyond blew my mind because I hadn't been watching for a few years. I missed half of the new Batman Superman adventures. So when I saw Batman Beyond, I'm like, 65 years in the future, Bruce Wayne is old. What fresh hell is this?
The voice kept calling me Bruce. In my mind, that's not what I call myself.
What do you call yourself? Oh, yeah. I suppose you would. But that's my name now.
Tell that to my subconscious.
I know another couple shows that you were watching.
Which are?
Guaranteed. Probably a couple of what I would consider the best shows we got in the entire decade. Tiny Toon Adventures and Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain.
Well, Tiny Toons, yes. I was... Yeah, there's Freakazoid. Tiny Toons, yes. I did watch that religiously. However...
We're tiny, we're toony, we're all a little loony. And in this cartoony, we're invading your TV. With comic dispensers, we crack up all the censors. On Tiny Toon Adventures, get a dose of comedy. So here's Acme Acres, it's a whole wide world apart. Our home sweet home, it stands alone, a cartoon work of art. The scripts were rejected, expect the unexpected. On Tiny Toon Adventures, it's about to start. They're furry, they're funny, they're Baz and Buster Bunny. Montana Max has money, Elmira is a pain. He's hunting and plucky, dizzy devil yucky. Curveballs and yucky, and Go-Go is insane. At Acme University, we earn our Toon degree. The teaching's has been getting laughs since 1933. We're tiny, we're toony, we're all a little loony. It's Tiny Toon Adventures, come and join the fun. And now our song is done. Uh-oh, I overslept again. Oh, hi, Toonsters. Exam day at Acme Lou. Got a motor.
I'm not now. I was then, because I was a dumbass back then. I was very anti-Animaniacs.
When will this insanity end?
back
You
then.
are retarded.
No, I'm dead serious. I'm not lying. I was very, like, I don't care. I don't want to watch it. I don't this. I don't that. Had I seen episodes and things like that, like 94, 95, 96, after it first debuted? Yes, I did. But when it first debuted, there was a guy, it was a counselor, and it's so strange that I remember this. There was a counselor at one of the places that I was placed in at the time, around 94, 95. Strangely enough, his name was Kevin. And he absolutely was. I mean, I was 13, 14-year-old. Well, yeah, I was 14 at the time. He was maybe late 20s, early 30s. And he was absolutely like gaga over everything Animaniacs. And I just did not care. I still wanted my 80s cartoons still. I had no interest whatsoever. Now, yeah, absolutely. I absolutely love Tiny Toons, Animaniacs. I never really got into Pinky in the Brain or Pinky Elmira in the Brain. That one was
Elmira was terrible, but
Yeah.
I do love Pinky in the Brain.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that, Mike, because I had a similar reaction. Because one of my best friends was like, I don't know, 2 years younger than me, maybe somewhere around there. I think 2 years younger than me. And I was grasping onto my 80s cartoons with like the death clutch. Like, I did not want to let go of the 80s cartoons. And I remember like staying over his house, spending the night or doing stuff like that. He always had either Tiny Toons or Animaniacs on. And at first I was resistant. At first I was like, I don't care what this is. Let's find Transformers, G.I. Joe, He-Man, Turtles, something that I like. But I think it was because of how many times I had to watch them at his house that I quickly turned into a big fan. But it's interesting because I think I had a similar experience where I was a little bit resistant at first.
Now, one of the beautiful things about Animaniacs, though, is it was a learning tool.
Yeah. Oh, very much so, yes. Tiny Toons as well. And the crazy thing about Tiny Toons is one of my best friends at the time... this had to have been... Yeah, because it was after I was in... This was like when the show was in syndication at that point. It was like 93, 94. It was like right before I got placed into State's Care at the time in Kentucky. Also named Mike. I had a Game Boy. He had a Game Gear. We watched Tiny Toons on the Sega Game Gear.
I didn't even know that was possible.
Game Gear had a TV tuner.
I had my cousin always had the Sega branded stuff, and then I had a friend that had all the Nintendo branded stuff. So I had the best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm.
I never owned anything until I was like old enough to have a job and buy my own.
So I came up with a list of what I feel like is the most the cartoons that defined the decade as far as like just 100% 90s. Like, and this is not counting the comic book cartoons, which we already talked about. And I'll leave Tiny Toons and Animaniacs off of it. But when I hear these cartoons read off to me, like, it screams 90s to me. And I want to see if you guys agree, disagree, or have anything to add. But it's a fairly lengthy list, so hold on to your hats. But I got Bobby's World, Darkwing Duck, Doug, Rugrats, Eek the Cat, Goof Troop, Rocko's Modern Life, Our Real Monsters, Freakazoid, Dexter's Laboratory, Hey Arnold, Cow and Chicken, Recess, Daria, Johnny Bravo, Wild Thornberries, and Powerpuff Girls.
Oh, yeah.
I would agree with you. I hate half the shows on that list.
Well, it's interesting because Mike said which cartoons did you avoid in the 90s, and it's almost that entire list for me, outside of maybe like 2 or 3 of them, but I avoided all of those like the plague, but I do feel like they all are just pure 90s.
Oh, they do fully embody the 90s. I will admit that. There are shows that probably would not survive today.
Right.
And so they, in nostalgia, they fit perfectly in that time span. And honestly, hearing those names again, like half that list, I avoided like the plague, even when they were new. Like at the time, like I gave them a shot. I was like, these suck, and then I would move on. And then other ones I would watch in waiting for shows I actually wanted to watch.
Right.
Out of that list, but majority of the time, I watched a lot of the more action-related stuff or more comedic action, like the Spielberg stuff. Usually if it was a part of a franchise, like the Spielberg-related content from Warner Brothers or comics or video game-related, I was all in. But a lot of the other 90s stuff, it was kind of hit or miss. But I still did sample just about everything that was out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a totally different type of cartoon than what we got in the 80s. It's still with those two, just kind of the weird, kind of zany type stuff that we're getting there. Mike, did you like any of those shows, or did you watch any of those shows?
Well, I know there's at least one show on there that Steve and I agree on, because we actually did a Tooncast episode on it, because if he says otherwise, he's a damn liar. Darkwing Duck was the man.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. So, I've seen almost all of them, bits and pieces. I didn't really watch all of them all of the time. Bobby's World got tiring after the first, 3 episodes.
I watched it for a season or two, and then I got tired of it. I remember, Carmen Sandiego.
Oh, yes.
Double Dragon.
Yep.
Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd Century. That was my jam.
The Mask.
The Mask, yes, I love The Mask. There was, like I said, Gargoyles. There was, my wife liked Rugrats. I never really was into that.
I've never, ever.
We had Iron Man, The Incredible Hulk, The Tick. Mortal Kombat.
Mortal Kombat. That was just so... Defenders of the Realm was so bad. It was just so bad.
Mummies Alive.
Mm-hmm.
There was just a ton of shows that were on in the 90s, and then you had your the one Saturday morning, you had the Fox Kids, you had the USA Cartoon Express, you had the there was so many different animated series on especially on Saturday morning. Like you could jump around anytime a show went to commercial and always have something to watch. Even if it was like bits and pieces of everything, like that was how I sampled my Saturday mornings, and I would sit there from the crack of dawn at 6 a.m. all the way until 11 and watch cartoons.
Yep, absolutely. Other stuff off that list. I liked Doug, but I didn't like Doug enough to watch it more than 2 or 3 times.
I watched the first season and then I was done.
Yeah, I couldn't even do that at the time. And the crazy thing is about a lot of these cartoons is going back now as almost 40 years old. Some of them I can go back and I can appreciate their 90s cheesiness or very 90s stamp. Back then, I could not. What are some of the other ones on the list you had mentioned?
We had Rugrats, Dexter's, Daria, Johnny Bravo, Powerpuff Girls, Thornberrys.
Yeah. Powerpuff Girls was interesting. Johnny Bravo was just too off the wall. He was awesome. He was, but that's too off the wall.
Thornberrys and Daria I did not watch.
Daria was an MTV show, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, see, the only thing that I will freely admit to, other than Celebrity Deathmatch, watching on MTV that was not a music video, was the 2001 TV series called Spider Games that only had like 1 season on MTV. But yeah, no, none of the MTV original tunes, even the 2003 MTV original new Spider-Man animated series after the first movie came out in 2002, it took me 10 years to watch that.
Yeah. Celebrity Deathmatch came out in 98. So
yep.
That was right towards the end of the...
I actually have a lot of that. My brother downloaded half the series from YouTube years ago and then gave it to us all on CD because we used to watch the crap out of that show.
Celebrity Deathmatch was the coolest.
What would you guys say were the best cartoons of the 90s? Like that stand the test of time. That like when we did our top 100 animated series list, if we were to revisit that again, like what 90s cartoons deserve to be on that list?
I would say I would definitely put like Spider-Man and X-Men the animated series. I would put Batman the animated series, Batman Beyond, and then there were other shows like Beast Wars was pretty good, obviously. Just throwing that out there.
Says the guy that can voice the lead villain.
Oh, yeah, I feel like you'd have to put Simpsons and South Park on there.
Yes.
Yeah,
You'd
Simpsons and South
Gargoyles,
Park.
Gargoyles,
Animaniacs, Tiny Toons,
SWAT Cats,
Darkwing Duck.
I still feel like
Rugrats
there's
might
some
have a
shows
shot, but I never watched it.
What's that?
Yeah,
Rugrats had a long life, but I never really got to it.
I only ever
and then
watched.
They grew up, and nobody cared.
Yeah,
it was on
cared.
from 91 until 2004.
Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Dragon Ball Z.
That still stands the test of time. They keep bringing it back.
Yeah.
Still love that show, but Pokemon was on in the 90s.
Oh, that's right.
And that still
Pokemon, Digimon. I didn't love it, but I just
also, I guess.
Yeah, Blue's Clues. That was more edutainment. That's more. Well, is Steve coming back too?
No, he actually made a comment about it on Twitter. Like he's like, yeah. He says it was funny when people were saying I was dead.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
I just watched an interview that some online site did with him. It was pretty funny, but he said, yeah, they're going to redo it. He says he's not involved, but he says I still have the couch and the first notebook and or the chair or whatever and whatnot. So
yeah, I don't lump the edutainment stuff in with actual night. Like Blue's Clues is pure edutainment to me. That's not Blue's Clues to me is in line with like Sesame Street and Fraggle Rock and to a lesser extent Barney.
But technically, I would still throw like Animaniacs in that loop too, though, because about 50% of the show was learning and 50% of it was just bad comedy.
Yeah.
To me, it's more like you could put Bob the Builder with like Thomas the Tank and like some of those stuff. I wouldn't put Sesame Street and those in there because I think it's just got a wider audience. But it's kind of a fuzzy line there.
Yep. I'm trying to think what else.
We've almost named every cartoon that aired in the 90s.
So no, not really.
I'm just kidding.
I never got into the Fantastic Four cartoons from the 90s.
It wasn't that good.
I liked Iron Man Season 2 more than Season 1 because I like the Iron Man Season 2 theme song better than the Season 1 theme song.
Well, that was kind of like SWAT Cats. I like Season 2, but theme song better than Season 1.
Yep.
Because it was
Steve kind of touched on this a little bit too, but the other interesting thing was the number of movies that got transformed into cartoons, starting with some of the Disney stuff. So obviously you had, a Little Mermaid and Aladdin, the Hercules and a Lion King animated series, but you had all kinds of random movies that were getting turned into cartoons. You had a Dumb and Dumber animated series,
The Mask, Ace Ventura.
We talked about Ace Ventura. Yep, absolutely. You had
Beetlejuice.
Yeah, so I mean, you had a ton of movies that were getting the animated series treatment, which some of those don't work very well, and some of them are entertaining. You had Back to the Future, Men in Black,
Godzilla.
Yeah.
They've tried to redo Godzilla the animated series so many times.
Well, Men in Black, that wasn't actually that bad. I actually watched it. It wasn't great, but it was definitely along the lines of like the Extreme Ghostbusters and stuff.
Right. It's just interesting seeing which ones get that animated treatment. I think there was even a Free Willy cartoon, which is weird.
Sadly, there was.
I think I remember it vaguely. We had a couple Sonic cartoons.
Ooh, I like to hang, but I got a juice.
Right.
We had Mega Man.
Hello, this is Ian James Corlett, and you are listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
Which Mega Man was awesome in the 90s.
There was a Fievel cartoon.
Well, there were there was an American Tail anime series too. Yeah, I would take the Mega Man series from '94 over both Sonic cartoons. That was just sheer torture. How anyone in their right mind or left mind says that the dark Sonic Sat AM is any good is beyond me. TV's Mr. The plots make absolutely zero sense half the time.
So do half the He-Man shows, but
trust me, I know. We've spent 6 years on that. Neil and I spent like 20 episodes on both Sonic stuff, and like you were saying, Ducks. Steve.
Yeah, Mighty Ducks.
Mighty Ducks. Yes. Yep.
Jumanji. There was a cartoon for Jumanji.
Yep. I remember that. That was terrible.
So, and then of course, like we said, there was they tried to bring back some of the 80 ones with like the New Adventures of He-Man, G.I. Joe Extreme. You had Inspector Gadget spin-off. You had a couple things like that. You had a My Little Pony spin-off that tried to come back. So you had a few attempts, but they weren't great attempts.
So that's the one thing between the 80s and the 90s I know of specifically, because I don't consider My Little Pony a girl power show. The original 80s My Little Pony cartoon series, I don't consider that like girl power or whatever else. Obviously Jem was and She-Ra was, but in the 90s, girls had Sailor Moon.
Yeah, no, My Little Pony was more of a generic one that just younger kids liked. It didn't have to be guys or girls, but you had the My Little Pony Tales, which came out in the 90s. You had All New Dennis the Menace. You had the Yo Yogi. So, I mean, you did have some that were trying to harken back to stuff from the yesteryear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just such a crazy, crazy time for cartoons. And I look at all of those, the good ones, the bad ones, the ones we love, the ones we want to avoid. And then I look at some of the stuff today, and I'm like, why do people like this? I don't get it. Specifically, and I'm not... all I'm saying is I don't understand it. I'm not saying I don't like it. I'm not saying I like it. I'm not making a judgment call. Adventure Time. Steven Universe. What the hell's wrong with your universe, Steven?
Hey, I hate both those shows, so just keep me out of it.
There's good stuff today. You just got to know where to find it. Like, obviously the 7D was great. There's been a lot of more action-oriented like reboots that have been decent. So I mean, there's been good stuff. It's just some of the stuff that's like the most popular, like big longevity cartoons. Some of those are a little bit more of a head scratcher, like you're talking about with Adventure Time and the Gumball one and
Gumball and
some of those.
What was the one with Regular Show? I don't understand that at all. Rick and Morty. It was very irregular.
It needed some special medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Rick and Morty, I don't get that. Rick and Morty to me is like a 21st century version of South Park, I would assume. I don't know. I'm just making an assumption here.
Most of the modern day like adultish programs that they have out there, I just don't care for. Like for one, like I find the animation of a lot of series that are out now very freaking lazy, and to me, I cannot, like, honestly, like that's part of the shutdown for me on like a lot of the animated series, particularly with Cartoon Network. But it's even stemmed into other series as well, whether it's Disney or some other ones. But like if the animation is terrible, and then the writing is just lowbrow, like to me that just makes it worse. Like South Park, for as basic as it looks, doesn't look like total garbage, which is surprising because it's just basically sprites with like heads that pop up and down on Canadians, and then like the mouths go, blah, 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 and it's not really all that comprehensive, but it looks better than the garbage we're getting from a lot of these series where it's just looks like somebody, like me, just sitting here scribbling on a piece of paper and drawing a character and saying, hey, this is interesting.
Flash or Microsoft Paint or something.
Yeah, I mean, it makes Ace Ventura, the animated series, look good, and that's bad. And that was bad back then, and that's why it flopped. Same thing with Dumb and Dumber. So if you're making those series look good by today's standards, something is wrong.
Yeah, I think that's like the one bad side effect of South Park is that people were like, hey, we don't have to spend a lot of money on animation. We don't even have to worry about animation. We can just do random nonsense. And if we're funny or if people get what we're saying, it's going to work. And it's turned into a lot of lazy, I think that's a great term, lazy animation. So you could even find a few 90s, late 90s shows that kind of fit that mold, but especially in the 2000s where it just seemed like we didn't. I mean, there are great cartoons that look great out there. I don't want to make it seem like everything is what we're talking about. There's some good looking cartoons that were out there, but there's also this like insurgence of this, what Steve's calling lazy animation, that's just not fun to watch from an aesthetic standpoint.
And there have been a lot of reboots too that have looked halfway decent. I mean, you look at the new, like even if you're not a fan of the new 2018 Ninja Turtles that's coming out, it's still not lazy by comparison. Like it's just a totally different aesthetic. And you look at the 2012, it's a totally different aesthetic. I mean, they're not lazy at all. Like they're just different designs. Whereas like a lot of the new original series that are coming out, I'm finding to be very lazy. It's the reinventions that are just reinventing themselves. It's not, and it is not with every series. Like we've kind of mentioned. It's just majority of them seem to be taking the low road out.
Yeah, especially Cartoon Network.
Yes, I hate Cartoon Network anymore.
Cartoon Network has always taken the low road out. I mean, they
killed Young Justice. I mean,
yeah, they killed Young Justice.
And the new Thundercats.
They killed Young Justice. They killed the new Thundercats. But before that, they killed the best He-Man cartoon ever in He-Man and the Masters of the Universe from 2002. That thing only got 39 episodes. It got 2.5 seasons. Right. As we're talking about this, I just so happened to pop over to our friends over on TVShowsOnDVD.com. TMNT retailer rumors say to expect a re-release of the complete classic series collection. This was reported on March 16th. Well, good on you. It's the 23 DVD set, originally released back in late 2012. What's unclear is if this is going to be a repackage like most of the time it is, instead of it being the Turtle Van packaging like it was, or if it's going to be a separate packaging. Supposedly it's expected on June 12th of this year, so who knows, but yes, that's going to be repackaged.
Nice.
Or something will happen with it, which would be really cool. That would be an awesome thing to have. I know when I went out to California in 2016, my buddy Doug, his wife had just gotten it for him for Christmas because the original set was on Amazon for fairly cheap at the time.
Yeah, I just put the little turtle van away with all of its DVDs.
Steve had mentioned earlier about Beast Wars. Beast Wars was amazing in hindsight.
It's the sole reason Transformers exists today.
Exactly.
It's because it reinvigorated the franchise, much like the Michael Bay films did for this generation. And love him or hate him, it was the reinvention point of that time.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's one though that maybe not as many people saw at the time that have grown to find it, love it. It's kind of like a cult following cartoon.
Absolutely. The reason why I bring it up is because in 1999 they launched Beast Machines, and while I love Beast Wars and Beast Wars has its place, and I absolutely do love it because it's more of the comedy show, I love the narrative in Beast Machines. And plus that theme song is kick-ass.
Well, I love Beast Machines as well. However, I find Beast Wars to be a more solid, cohesive writing, and that's why it went 3 seasons and almost went 4, except for the fact that Hasbro wanted to reinvent it to sell more toys that were diverse.
Beast Machines essentially went 2 seasons, but...
Well, they did go 2 seasons.
Yeah, I know. What I'm surprised that... I get why you like Beast Wars more. I'm surprised you don't like Beast Machines a little bit more now, because look, I've rewatched that show so many times. That is essentially an inside to the mind of Megatron that we've never ever seen.
Well, no,
all of his sides,
and I understand that, give it its due, but I love. And I can do both Megatron versions, voice and mentality. But to me, the series was more fun and there was more going on in Beast Wars, and you get to see more of the cunningness, whereas Megatron pretty much already won in Beast Machines. He just kept tipping his hat because Primal was there and he was getting, I mean, granted, this is another discussion for another day, but he kind of screwed himself by overplaying his hand that he'd already won and toying with Primal instead of just exterminating him, which again was his ego, which was from Beast Wars. So it essentially still plays into that. In Beast Wars, he actually did sentence Primal to death by sending him in his stasis pod and blowing him away. So,
yeah. But Rhinox, did his mystical rhino thing and brought him back.
Crouching
I mean, seriously.
Hidden spark.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, seriously, how many bodies does that Prime need?
Megatron 2.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, that was the reinvigoration point for that franchise, and so without
absolutely,
you wouldn't have it. That's kind of why things like G.I. Joe fizzled out, and Turtles, it went through the 80s and the better part of the 90s, and then was reinvented like 5 years later in the 2000s.
Yep.
Right.
So it everything that is old is new again, and as long as you keep reinventing it, it will survive and stand the test of time.
Give me that Silverhawks reboot, damn it.
Never gonna happen.
Unless, never say never, because look at Netflix. I mean, we've got a She-Ra show that's returning. Yep. We've got Voltron, which is probably the best we've gotten. And so you look at what's coming. I mean, we're going to have a new Animaniacs series coming to Hulu in a couple of years.
Yeah.
So I mean, the fact that they're now that they've done this testing with regular television shows of the 80s and 90s, and it's proven to succeed, the animated series continuations are getting revivals now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just boggles my mind that DreamWorks' Voltron is already up to 5 seasons on Netflix.
Now I will say this because I do have information on this. Reboot. The reboot of Reboot is coming out at the end of the month of March. It comes out like March 30th or whatever, and.
Right.
Depending on when this airs, you'll hear my thoughts on that either way. That being said, the series, they're not going for a continuation of Reboot like they'd been teasing for years. No, they're going for a Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad or VR Troopers type program with the show where they digitize people almost like Tron and put them in the Reboot universe, and it's essentially been rewritten completely, like as if the original never happened.
I know you love this franchise, but I am sorry. After hearing that, I would rather have a third Tron film.
Well, and I agree with you, but Mainframe, Rainmaker Entertainment, whatever, they're such a cluster-run company that it is impossible, and I hate saying this about any company, but they're such a cluster of a company that they can't even get basic information out to the fans or to media in general. Like, their marketing is terrible. It's coming out in 15 days, and it's not had any marketing other than a trailer drop. and it's got the most, like, it rivals, like, there's 12, maybe 14,000 now dislikes on their trailer on YouTube to the, like, 300 likes that are on it.
Yeah.
For the series, and there's so much venomous hate on this series that it just proves that if you change the formula too much, the fans will tell you.
Yep.
And so it's, yeah, I'm in the series. The original isn't all that great by comparison, but it was revolutionary for its time, where it created that CG environment that spawned Beast Wars, that spawned Toy Story, that, you know, we got all these animated films as a CG method.
Mm-hmm.
And Reboot was kind of that initial starting point that kind of set everything else in motion.
It was, and it is. There's no denying that, but kind of fell flat 5 miles from the finish line.
It made it 4 seasons. It actually was pretty strong towards the end. It's just that
the revival has just been sputtering along.
Well, the revival has been sputtering along for better part of 10 years, where they've been teasing fans. So, anyways, it's gonna flop majorly. But that's you know, you invent things, you reinvent things to a point, and that can revive it. You reinvent it too much, you destroy it and tank it. So,
yeah,
pretty much. Yep. What else do we want to bring up before we get out of here, guys?
Just curious, Mike, since you were almost the same age as me. You know, we're talking about these 90s. Obviously, you had the comic book cartoons, you had the video game cartoons, you had some of these classic, iconic 90s shows, the primetime cartoons, the crazy anamorphic cartoons. Do you prefer 90s or 80s cartoons?
It's a mixture. I can't pick one or the other, because going back to some of these 80s cartoons, just, God, what the hell. I will say, and I will forever say, I don't care what anyone says, there's no arguing over this. Hashtag not my He-Man. Hashtag not my Skeletor. The New Adventures of He-Man is the single worst thing to ever happen to the He-Man franchise, ever.
I rather enjoyed the initial run of it.
I don't know how. The writing is all over the place. The animation
didn't matter. For me, it was the aesthetics.
Yeah, the aesthetics were ass. Look at Skeletor in that first season. He's a Green Goblin wannabe.
You know what? I still enjoyed it.
You were too young to understand what you were enjoying.
Yeah.
You're still too young to
I'm
understand
also
what you
one
enjoy.
That liked G.I. Joe the movie, and
so do I.
Which one?
The original, like, animated one, and then I
Oh.
liked the Deke series because of the battle armor that Cobra Commander got, and the fact that he stuck it to Serpentor. I didn't like the writing when it got more absurd with Metalhead and everything else, but I did like the new Cobra Commander battle armor.
I can see parts of that too. I liked it as well. I'd have to take the 80s over the 90s, but I do think the 90s do have some gems in there, especially Gargoyles, Animaniacs, Tiny Toons, and some of the cartoon comic books.
Yeah, it really depends for me. Like, depends on the series. Like, since, well, obviously it's over on Hulu now, but when Animaniacs first debuted on Netflix last year, a couple of years ago, whenever it was, I went through a full-on binge and watched all 4 seasons, or all 3 seasons, or however many it is. Same thing with Tiny Toons. I'm still binging Tiny Toons now. I've seen Batman Beyond and Beast Machines more times than I can count on both hands. I just love those series so much. It just depends on what I feel like going back and watching, whether it's 90s stuff, 80s stuff. There's a lot of stuff, like I said, from the 90s that I just avoid like the plague.
Well, I find that things live better in nostalgia than they do being rehashed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so there are certain shows that I know I can revisit. There are certain shows that I know I should never revisit. And if it was one that I could enjoy the majority of the series, like 90% of the series, I know I'm safe to go back and watch it. And there's very few on that list, but it's a lot of them. I will actually find the best episode of whatever said series is.
The Low Road.
Well, maybe to you. Don't even make me go there, dude. So there's some series that I've actually over the years, I'll find the actual episode, I'll download that episode, and then I'll just hold on to that particular one. And that way the nostalgia of the series lives on, that it's great based on that one episode. And that's all I have to remember it. I don't even care about the TV series as a whole, because that's the only one that I stick with. And then there's other series where I have to own the whole series. So it's finding those gems of the 90s. And the funny thing is none of the ones that were on that particular list of the things that epitomize the 90s, I didn't have any of those on my list of things that I had to own or that I had a download of.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah, the ones that I would take and buy or keep from the 90s would not be the ones that you would think of as a 90s cartoon, probably. So
nope.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, now we don't really, that's the crazy thing. Yeah, a lot of this stuff is still on DVD, some of it isn't, but now with Hulu and or Netflix or whatever, you can essentially go find any of these shows. Like I said, Tiny Toons and Animaniacs are both on Hulu. Like Steve said, Animaniacs in the next couple of years is going to get a continuation series.
I think with the TV series, though, and cartoons, I still would rather have a physical copy of them, though, where I can just...
It depends on what it is. Yeah, it depends on what it is.
I'm more likely to go digital with just straight up movies before I do it with TV series for some reason. I'll binge them on Netflix and whatnot, but the ones that I really like, I want a physical copy.
I have very few series I actually care to have a physical copy for anymore, whereas most of them I'd rather just stream them because I don't want to... It's too much of a hassle for me to want to go change a disc or to, in some cases, actually get up and do it. Or go dig them out of a particular cabinet somewhere.
Right.
So for me, the ease of use of being able to just click it... For instance,
I guess I'm talking about more about the cartoon TV series, because a lot of those aren't available to stream unless you're doing it illegally or through some ghetto website. So it's more that I get the regular TV series because you can do most of those on Amazon Prime, Netflix, Hulu, etc. But outside of a few select cartoon shows, if you want to stream Cops from the 80s, not the crime show, the cartoon show, you can't just stream that easily.
Actually, you can. I told you about that.
Well,
you can.
Most times you can't do something like that.
But what I'm saying, but now I said that. Mill Creek has the rights to Cops. They have the DVD. Mill Creek Entertainment.
Main streaming sites, I'm saying.
No, it's not on one of the main streaming sites. You're right. But you can legally go to the Mill Creek website and legally watch all 65 episodes of Cops without feeling like you're stealing from the company.
Saying there's a lot of more cartoons that are more obscure and not available for those services compared to just an everyday TV series that was popular.
Well, but the benefit of it is nowadays every company is pretty much coming up with their own streaming service. So you have Disney that's going to have basically everything Marvel. It's going to have everything Disney. It's going to have everything Fox. And so when they come out with their streaming service in 2019, you're going to have the entire full gamut of that. And then Warner Brothers as well is coming up with their own. And they're going to have things like SWAT Cats, Scooby-Doo, all the DC animated universe. You're going to have... your Animaniacs and all that stuff, which of course is on Hulu as well. I mean, you're going to have a lot of that on both, but
then the problem is going to be how many services can you afford to have?
It's going to depend on how much they cost.
Yeah.
And to me, honestly, it's going to be a weighing option when it comes to that point. But honestly, I would much rather have one service that had it all.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to stream all the stuff on Boomerang, but I'm not paying for their app.
I won't pay Cartoon Network.
Well, okay, so I will sit here and say I do pay for the Boomerang app. It's $5 a month. I don't know, as far as I can tell, it's not going to go up anytime soon as far as increase, but what's on there for that price for just $5 a month. It's all the classic Looney Tunes stuff, all Yogi Bear, it's everything we grew up with.
Oh, it's attractive, but I'm just saying, like, if you give $5 to them, if you give $15 to Netflix, if you give $5 to Amazon Prime and whatever Disney's going to be, and it starts to add up.
It's going to be like paying for cable all over again.
Right, which is fine because nobody has cable anymore anyway. So
No. Cable? What's that?
A la carte.
That's right. That's the way cable should be.
I think I predicted that years ago. I was like...
I actually did when I was in high school. I was like, why can't we just pick like 10 channels? Like, here's a price for 10 channels, here's a price for 20 channels, but I can pick whichever ones I want. And everyone's like, you're crazy.
Well, I know. I did that too. I used to argue with the cable companies back when I hated paying for cable. And they were like, why don't you sign up for cable to get a better discount on your internet? I'm like, I only want your internet because your cable sucks. It's like, there's nothing on it I want to watch. I'm like, if I could choose the channels, then I would be great. You know, a la carte.
Right. Now all of a sudden it's a thing.
Yep.
It's crazy. Any other cartoon stuff we want to bring up, guys?
I think we nailed it pretty good.
I think so.
All right. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Geekcast Radio and wish you'll join us next time. We'll be exploring the movies of the 90s, and Movie Revolt Dan is going to be joining us for that. For now, I am TFG1 Mike with...
Steve Megatron Phillips.
And Optimus Solo.
Thank you for listening. Until next time.
That's not helping.